You just have like a fascinating journey, story. I mean, you were born in the United States, then you wound up in the West Bank. Now you're back in the States. Your politics have changed. You've spent time in jail. Can you tell us how you evolved politically and personally?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people who are in, I would say, more traditional Jewish environments in the United States get this story, this sort of like APAC approved story about what Israel is, and what that means for Jews. When my family moved to the West Bank, a lot of the pieces of that the existence of Palestinians was this sort of like problem that Jews wish in their peaceful and loving ways that they could come to an agreement, but the Palestinians don't want that. They only want violence. That these are pieces that in the rhetoric of the settlement started to fall away. And like as a child was repeating them, other settlers were telling me like, no, you don't need to say that here. Like much more extreme language is used. My settlement is, as a settlement goes, one of the more moderate ones. And still, like over half of the people here in the past election voted for the Ben-Gvir and Smotrich slate. So getting those people into power, and that like was something that like was very, I would say, like discordant for me. As I learned more about the history of the conflict, I was constantly trying to approach it from, well, while this is incredibly scary for me as a Jew, now Israeli, it's much worse for the Palestinians involved. So I was trying to understand always, what is it that makes it so this is something that they would want to engage in? Why wouldn't they take any of these outs that the Hasbara narrative, the official Israeli narrative, was saying that we were allegedly giving them? The more I learned about the actual realities of the conflict, the more I saw that Palestinians are not given any out. Violent resistance is not working and does not work. Nonviolent resistance does not work. Protests do not work. Riots do not work. Nothing works. No matter what they do, they are greeted with violence. As a result, a lot of them say, well, if I'm going to lose anyway, I'm at least going to make you lose as well. And it was a hard thing to recognize. For me, it really crystallized during the March return in Gaza when Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, where a nonviolent protest was met in many cases with live ammunition, in many cases with like other tactics that led to the death of Palestinian protesters. With over 100 Palestinians dead, nothing else changed, and the Israeli narrative never recognized the groundbreaking nature of the nonviolent protest, the biggest since the first Intifada. And then I realized I didn't want to serve. I was drafted anyway, mandatory conscription. And after going through basic training and specialized training in the Air Force, I was deployed to a base, the closest Israeli air base to Gaza, and told that as soon as I finished up my training, that I would be involved in the sort of combat support for the Air Force, and specifically that I was going to be on munitions and explosives support for the F-16 fighter jets that are used to bomb Gaza. I was doing my best at that point to be sort of like disruptive and not get to that point where I would be involved. I was deliberately failing my tests to sort of pass into being a full soldier. But after some escalating tensions in 2021, the Sheikh Jarrah protests and the lead up to what would become the 2021 Israel-Gaza war, known there as Operation Guardian of the Walls, a preliminary airstrike was called. And my commander said, all right, well, now is sort of an emergency. It's wartime. We're going to pretend as if you passed the test because you're good to go. Now load the bombs onto the plane so that we can drop them on our Gazan targets. And at that point, I realized that there was nowhere else that I could go, nowhere that I could try and compromise and reconcile in a way where what I was doing would not be in direct conflict with my values for human life, my values of opposing violence, of understanding that it's not a viable solution for solving any sort of conflict, definitely not one where it is a sort of an ethnic and national insurgency movement for their own freedom. And I conscientiously objected to service in the Israeli military, which started a 4-month process of Israeli military prison as I fought to be recognized as a conscientious objector, which would mean that under international law I would be exempt to serve, except that in Israel, you are guilty until proven innocent of lying about being a conscientious objector. So I had to sit out my time in military prison while making my case. But that was really a moment where I realized that beliefs are not things that one can have just internally. There's nothing that about believing something in your heart that makes you any better of a person or can lead to any change. And that actions and going out there and doing something and standing up for your values, even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if it puts you in a place where things are more difficult, is what actually makes change. And that there are a lot of people who sit at home and love feeling like they know the best about themselves, but they don't go out there and actually advocate for those changes. And at that point, I realized this is something that I have to be doing. And so after I was recognized as a conscientious objector and discharged from military prison and military service, I started doing activism on the Israeli left and fighting for the freedom and Palestinians and justice for the occupation and apartheid. And then at Columbia, I continued that work. After October 7th, I founded Jews for Ceasefire and continued to fight for a vision that I and Mohsen share in common, which is a free and equal land for all Israelis and Palestinians. That's something that I think is very simple and has somehow made people like me and Mohsen have a lot of people who wish a lot of ill upon us. There are people who want to stop equal rights from happening. That's always happened. People who oppose civil rights in the United States, and it's always been the case. And then a lot of other people who are inspired through fear, primarily, to follow those who hate. And part of how I think we will have success as a movement is the ability to both stand our ground and be strong in saying, absolutely, there is no way that I'm compromising on my values of justice, of peace, of security, and of freedom. And at the same time, there is nothing for you to be afraid of. That this is a future that is not just good for Palestinians, but good for Israelis as well. That oppression and apartheid are sicknesses that affect far more so the oppressed, but also harm the oppressor. And that a liberated future, whether it was in the American South, in South Africa, or in Israel-Palestine, is a future that is better for everyone.